Good morning and welcome, everyone. We're happy to host this quarterly Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee meeting. Today, I'm joined by our advisory committee members, the DEP staff, special guests, and the public. So thank you. My name is Millie Garcia Serrano, and I serve as the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup Assistant Commissioner. And as you know, the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup meets on a quarterly basis, and particularly through the auspices of this advisory committee. And we serve as a forum where MassDEP seeks comments and input on wayside cleanup matters that touch on our regulation policies and programs, and also some initiatives. Today, with our Bureau of Wayside Cleanup staff, and also coupled with our BWSC office hours meetings, again, we try to bring about important content, regulatory content, and just in general, try to engage with the public and the practitioners, the licensed eye professionals who really, truly are a key integral part of the success for our programs. So today, our goal is to present information, provide you with updates, as well as also listen and take note of your comments, questions, and concerns. So if you're new to this forum, we want to say welcome and thank you again for spending time with us this morning. Next. Right. Okay, next one, please. Slide number 2, perfect. Okay, so this is our agenda for today. We have a packed agenda as usual. It's been developed with the assistance of many individuals who work to ensure that our advisory committee meeting provides forum for meaningful discussion. And today's agenda includes the usual 21E program updates, various topic areas. As you know, our division directors like to spend a little bit of time talking about what's new with them. The one program update that's not showcased today, but it's a mainstay for us, a very important program, is the Division of Technical and Financial Support. They are the engine for a lot of the contracting work that goes behind the scenes for the work that we do. So Linda Stafford, albeit she's in the virtual room. If anyone has any questions, Linda's available. And then we'll hear from the LSP board, with Terry Wood as the Executive Director of the LSP Board. She'll be providing us with a 5-minute update, as well as Katie Kutzma, who is the President of the LSP Association. Then we will introduce the draft COM25 soils policy. I will introduce it, and Luke Rogers will be providing an overview, coupled with an informational video we'd like to play for you. Next. Along the theme of soils, the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup has invited Michael Stiller from AECOM to provide us with a presentation that he delivered at the AEHS conference this past October. And he's changed it a little bit just in case folks have attended the AEHS conference and listened to the presentation, but I think it's yet another innovative way of looking at soils and managing soils for big projects. Then we will have Greg Braun provide us with an Office of Research and Standards updates on 2 specific topics. John Ziegler will deliver information on the PFAS updates, what's new in the PFAS world, and then 5 minutes for Q&A and wrap up. Okay, so my administrative updates are sort of short and sweet, but also bittersweet. As most of you all know, Ken Mara, the director of our Division of Policy and Program Development, he's been one of our most integral and important members of our Bureau for decades. Unfortunately for DEP, Ken will be retiring at the end of the week, and I just wanted to at least acknowledge that today. Also celebrate the many, many years that Ken has given to the public service, especially DEP and so many other activities through DEP. He has served in so many different roles within DEP and also externally. So let me just note a few of his accomplishments, serving and representing the commissioner on the 21J board. He's also chaired the ITRC, which is a very important consortium that MassDEP belongs to. He's supported AHS, the NUMOA Soils Committee. He's also been on the Clean Energy Results Program Committee, the Regulatory Committee, and the Climate Committees, amongst a whole bunch of other things he's done. We will certainly miss his amazing insight, his expertise. He brought so much information and knowledge and a deep bench stemming from his private sector days working in the petroleum industry. And for that, we will be forever grateful. This being his last advisory committee, I just want to express my personal sincere appreciation. All the help he gave me when I transitioned to the Boston office, especially on behalf of our Bureau of Wayside Cleanup. Thank you for his exceptional service. In his place, Brian Roden has been appointed as the acting director of the Division of Policy and Planning, Policy and Program Development. Brian brings exceptional expertise as well. As you all know, he served and continues to serve as the Compliance and Enforcement and Audits Coordinator, as well as he's provided significant leadership to our EDEP data portal optimization efforts. So thank you, Brian, for accepting to serve in this role. We look forward to working with you very closely as we continue to carry on the mission that is so very important and integral for our Bureau through the policy and program development efforts. In addition, also, I wanted to note that both Brian Roden and John Ziegler, who's our BWSC PFAS coordinator, he will be serving on the 21J board, representing Commissioner Heipel on that particular board. I'm grateful for both of them having accepted this ask, and I thank them, and I look forward to also getting great representation on the board through Brian and John. And then shifting gears, finally, just a quick word on the BWSC technical assistance grants. As you know, they continue to serve an important role and the purpose to support effective public involvement during the assessment and/or cleanup phase of any disposal site. So just to let you know that we will be soon announcing the recipients of the FY 26-27 grant cycle. And we want to thank all the organizations that participated and applied for this round of awards. So stay tuned for future grant opportunities. And thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask for Diane to provide us with the federal program updates.
All right, thanks, Millie. So yes, please go to the next slide, thanks. All right, I'm here to give you a few updates from these 3 of our federal grant programs. Next slide, please. All right, first up in Superfund is we're very happy to announce that EPA headquarters recently approved an early removal action for the lower Neponset River site. The site, so this part of the site is the first reach of the site, which is 1 mile from the confluence of Mother Brook to the T&H Dam. And this area has some very highly contaminated, PCB contaminated sediments. So there have been risks identified with the significant PCBs in sediment as well as in floodplain soil, and the poor condition of the Tileston and Hollingsworth Dam. And there's concern that because the dam is in poor condition, if it lets go, there's a significant amount of sediment built up behind the dam that could then be unleashed. So these conditions were significant enough that EPA determined that they ought to address the situation early before the full Superfund process plays out. So this action is going to involve removal of sediment with PCBs greater than 1 milligram per kilogram from 2 critical deposition areas, one of them being just behind the dam. Then removal of the top 3 sediment in the rest of the mile that encompasses reach 1. There'll also be removal of PCB contaminated soils from the front 100-year floodplain along that reach, and permanent cap will be installed in areas where the 1 milligram per kilogram cleanup goal wasn't achieved or couldn't be achieved. Then the dam will be removed, and there'll be a little bit of sediment and soil removal around the dam area just to facilitate proper grading when the dam is gone. The total estimated cost of this removal action is $78.5 million, which really makes it unprecedented certainly in this region, if not in the country. It's very, very unusual to have anything this expensive be done as a removal action. But the hope is that for this reach of the river, this removal action will also serve as the final remedial action. So the idea was trying to not go at it twice. All right, next slide, please. All right, the next is from our pre-remedial program. We're happy to announce that the former National Fireworks site in Hanover has now been proposed for listing. EPA Region 1 presented the case to the listing panel at headquarters just yesterday. The site was the location of fireworks and munitions development, manufacturing, testing, and storage from about 1907 to 1970. And the remains of those processes results in unacceptable health and safety risks from munitions, explosives, mercury, lead, and VOCs, excuse me. So there has been significant assessment and removal completed under the MCP over the years. Approximately 70 million has been spent. That's been funded by PRPs, as well as a settlement from the bankruptcy of one of the PRP companies. The cleanup to date has been mainly for munitions and explosives at this point. Over 192,000 munitions items have been removed from the site, and of those, over 21,000 were contained explosives. So it was a very significant site, and a lot has been done, but much more is needed. And the Commonwealth attempted to negotiate with the PRPs and get sufficient funding to complete the work needed, but that effort was unsuccessful. So in 2023, we requested that EPA consider the listing. We've been working with them since that time to develop the case for listing, as well as working with the communities to garner whether there's support in the communities, which there's Hanover, a little bit in Hanson, and Pembroke is the third community affected, and they are all supportive. So as I said, the case was presented yesterday to the listing panel. We're not quite sure what the timing is for the next step, but we're hoping we'll have a new Superfund site within the next year. All right, next slide, please. All right, and finally, I have a Brownfields program update. We're continuing to do assessment and cleanup work using our two Brownfields grants that total about $6 million. We are still accepting requests for assistance as well. Currently, we're working on 23 projects across the state. You can see those on this map. The assessment projects are shown with the orange and on red, and the cleanup sites are in blue. The type of projects here, it ranges from a very small assessment to a $500,000 removal. So there's the whole range, but basically the projects have to have a municipal benefit, and we've focused toward communities that are low population or economically disadvantaged, and consistent with the governor's priorities on housing. We're also now really focused on trying to assist projects that have that will benefit housing development. So next slide, please. All right, so if you have if you want information or would like to request assistance, the best person to contact would be David Foss, our state brownfields coordinator. If you have questions about a specific site in one of the regions, the regional coordinators would be the best people to contact at first. And the brownfields assistance request form is shown. The link is here, but it's on the website. And that's it.
Sorry, I was just unmuting. Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Mara from Policy and Program Development. Thank you all for your kind words, and thank you, Millie, for everything. Since this is the last time I'm going to be talking to you guys, I wanted to leave you with a snapshot of where we're at with policies left behind. So, Amita, can you put the next slide up? So there's the list of pretty much everything I could think of. The column on the left are the ones that were finished this year. Of course, the big one was AUL's and Peggy Shaw's team. There'll be more coming on that because the training is coming up for that in the winter, and that'll be led by Peggy Shaw. Other ones that were completed include off-gas treatment. The MCP amendments Q&As are finally all done. They're all posted. Thanks to Liz Denley, the CAMs are almost all completed by now and includes the PFAS CAM for method 1633. It also includes the REDUA document, which I probably should have put as a separate bullet, but that was all part of the CAM effort. As far as the documents that are in or near public comment, the three in red should be on your radar big time right now because they're in the process. Risk characterization, those of you who've been following it know that it's been broken into several different chapters and parts, each with different timeframes, and Greg Braun will be talking about that later today. Engineered barriers and FAMs, that actually came back from public comment at the end of October, and John Fitzgerald, who wrote led the engineered barriers piece of it, of that document, and Tom Jackham, who wrote the FAM piece of it. They're compiling the comments and addressing them and putting together what hopefully will be final versions of these things. And so there'll be more on that, I'm sure, by the next time we meet in this meeting in February. And then finally, COM25 soils is finally been released. You've probably seen the announcement, but there'll be a lot more on that to come in a few minutes when Luke Rogers talks. And I understand we're going to hear from Paul Locke from Beyond during that one. Other ones that are close, hopefully, to public comment include the PIP or public involvement guidance, the EPAM operating regimen, and John Fitzgerald's opus, the VPH-EPH update. All three of those should be coming to public comment in 2026. The ones in progress, not quite ready for prime time, but they're on the chopping block right now, are the master Q&A, the UST closure assessment manual, vapor intrusion, which Nancy Fitzpatrick is putting together and leading the team on that. Right now, they're taking a look at what's going to be in the new ITRC vapor intrusion guidance document, and maybe there's stuff there we can reference or plagiarize for our document. Then there's PFAS documents, including the Q&A and the interim sampling. John Ziegler can talk about all things PFAS later on today. It also includes the PFAS CAM for method 533. Liz Denley recommended that as long as we're at it doing 1633, we might as well do 533 because it's cheaper, smaller analyte list than it is just for drinking water. But I think that'll be the very last CAM update for this go around. And then finally, in progress, as I mentioned before, AUL training led by Peggy Shaw is coming up in the winter of 2026. So you'll be hearing more about that. And on the right-hand column, still needed, these are the various topics that we've heard from all of you and lots of other people, that these are the things that are needed. We just haven't had the time or the staff because we're busy on everything on the left, but these are the things that we know are needed. And it begins with monitored natural attenuation. There's been a lot of demand for that one. There was a draft from 2002 that was taken down. We're going to refresh that and update it, and hopefully that'll be something that would be moving fast sooner rather than later. Other ones that are still hanging out there, asbestos in soil, that's been out there for decades. A capping SOP is another one for those that don't feel that they need a full-blown RCRA engineered barrier cap. There might be alternatives that are also acceptable, and that would be what a capping SOP would address. We've been having internal discussions about the need or no need to update COM 97 and COM 94. Those discussions are ongoing. Historic fill, that's Paul Locke's old draft from 2015 or 2016, is still on the web. That is still sitting there as well. And then in training, following up on whatever we come out with for new guidance on M&A, there would be M&A training. We've heard your request for that, and that is on our radar. Along with, there's been a request for an encore performance of the ER training. And then finally, coal tar characterization has popped up again, despite our best efforts 2 years ago when we tried to clarify that in the MCP amendment Q&As, but apparently there's still some confusion and some need for more clarification. So that's it for the in the policy world, and just want to say thank you all again for your kind comments, and it's been a pleasure working with all of you. So I think next up is Kathy.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Kathy Kiley, Emergency Response Coordinator. Next slide. Thank you, Amita. So just wanted to note a few changes since we last spoke. One actually in the Western Regional Office, Derek Bruce is now the ER Section Chief. Dave Slowick retired in June. In Northeast, Ken Sanderson is the new ER Section Chief. And in Central, Tony Kropaska retired, and we're in the process of hiring a new ER Section Chief. And John Bercier is acting as the ER Section Chief in the interim. So there's been some changes, but you should have all that now. As far as the notifications that we've received to date for releases of 430, this was through the 11/17, and 449 complaints. That's about on par with what we typically have been seeing, somewhere around 1,000 releases and 1,000 complaints for a fiscal year. The release notifications, as you'd expect, the majority of those are 2-hour notifications, and the majority of those are the roadways. Next, please. For the MOSPRA highlights, the Marine Oil Spill Prevention and Response Program, through the years, through 17 years, they've completed, for the geographic response strategies testing and first responder training, they've developed 160 GRSs to date. They've trained over 3,000 first responders, and they've completed 10 exercises in 2025. We do about 10 a year, a calendar year, and 10 are planned in 2026. And we always coordinate with the municipalities for the planned exercises and often combine a few of the communities together for those exercises and training. For the oil spill trailers, there are 81 trailers in the 70 communities, coastal communities. In 2026, we plan to replace 5 of the trailers due to their age and condition. The MOSPRA grant program has been very successful. The first round in 2021, there were 9 grants, approximately $214,000. Round 2, there were, in fiscal 25, there were 15 grants valued at approximately $690,000. And we're planning a round 3 in fiscal year 2026. Hopefully that announcement and grant application RFR would be posted late 2025 or early 2026. Expect to award over $1 million in grants for that round. And there will be outreach to communities prior to posting this announcement and the application on Combis, so that if individuals or communities have questions, we can talk about the potential project at that time. Once it's posted, we can't have those conversations. It can answer questions, but we can't answer specific questions about a project. Also, the Oil Spill Act advisory committee meeting was held, gosh, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, and that was very successful. That recording of that presentation will be posted on the MOSPRA website, and I did post the website here at the bottom, and that will take you to all the information about the program itself, whether it's the trailer locations, the grants, more about the GRSs, and you can also see the GRSs via MassMapper to get real-time and information. So wanted to make sure you folks had that information as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, that's all I had.
All right, I'll take that as my cue. My name is Michelle Craddock. I am the Natural Resource Damages Program Coordinator at MassDEP. I'm just going to give you a couple kind of quick updates on the Natural Resource Damages Program. So as kind of a quick overview, the NRD program manages 14 active NRD cases in various stages of assessment, settlement negotiation, and restoration implementation. And as part of that restoration implementation, we oversee 12 active grant awards and interdepartmental service agreements for projects ranging from things like dam removal, design and permitting, to salt marsh restoration and fish ladder construction, and lots of other stuff as well. And the funding for all of these grants and projects is coming directly from those NRD settlements. These grants are administered by MassDEP and are typically awarded to municipalities and local nonprofits who are kind of doing the on-the-ground work here. So a few updates from the past couple months. I would say one of the most exciting was a $2.1 million NRD settlement at the Schpack landfill site in Norton and Attleboro. This was finalized in July. For those unfamiliar, the Schpack site encompasses about a little over 9 acres of land in Attleboro and Norton. The landfill, when it was in operation, received both domestic and industrial waste, including inorganic and organic chemicals, as well as some radioactive wastes. And so kind of the disposal and release of those wastes at the site contaminated soils, sediment, groundwater, wetlands, and wildlife with hazardous substances. And those kind of contaminants and releases resulted in injuries to natural resources, both on and adjacent to the site. And so this $2.1 million settlement resolves the NRD claims on the site, and we will be using those funds to implement restoration projects that benefit the injured natural resources. This was a joint settlement with the United States Department of the Interior, and we'll be working with them probably in late spring, summer 2026 to start kind of the restoration planning process and solicit project ideas there. Some other kind of highlights in the restoration sphere are the Curvin Park Wetland and Floodplain Restoration Project, which is in Pittsfield. This is going to be the restoration of about 13 acres of wetland and floodplain habitat. This project was a requirement of the GE Housatonic NRD consent decree, which was filed, over 20 years ago. So this is one of the last remaining projects there. But, this summer we hosted public meetings. We had a public comment period on the project. There's a lot of support for it, and it should be going to construction in early spring 2026. We also awarded a grant to the Connecticut River Conservancy, utilizing funds from a settlement associated with a 2019 acid spill into the North River in Coleraine. And so the Connecticut River Conservancy will be using those funds for design of removal of the Coleraine Lower Reservoir Dam, as well as some stream bank stabilization. And these projects will benefit all the injured natural resources, including surface water, sediments, and cold water fisheries resources. And then finally, just of note, is that this summer we awarded an entered an interagency service agreement with Mass Wildlife for about $500,000 to do design and permitting of the Ram Island restoration, which is an island owned by the Commonwealth as a wildlife preserve off of Mattapoisett. This is a really kind of large project and will help protect one of the largest nesting and breeding habitats for terns in Massachusetts, as well as restore salt marsh. And this project is funded by Bouchard B120 settlement funds. This is, I think, the last project remaining from the settlement funds from that case. So excited to get it started and to be able to work with Mass Wildlife on that. So those are my updates. Feel free to reach out with any questions. Thank you.
I guess that's, I'm up next. Hi, I'm Terry Wood. I'm the Executive Director for the LSP Board, and I'm just going to offer a few updates about what's going on at the board. The first topic is the LSP exam. The board recently finished updating the exam in light of recent MCP amendments. We offered the exam in September and October, and going forward, we'll be offering the exam twice per year, once in the spring and once in the fall. We'll be selecting dates for the 2026 spring exam within the next few weeks, and those dates will be posted to the website. The next topic is regulation amendments. The final version of the amendments to the LSP board regulations are currently in internal agency review. Once that review is done, the final amendments will go to the Secretary of State for the amendments to be promulgated. We can't say how long that process will take. For LSPs who are looking at upcoming renewals of their license, we've been getting questions about because the amendments include updated continuing education requirements. People have been asking us if they still need to follow the existing regulations. We've been telling people, since we don't know when the new amendments will take effect, to continue to take continuing education courses based on what's currently in the regulations. The next topic is LSP application forms. The board recently uploaded updated versions of the LSP application forms that are intended to simplify and clarify questions on the forms. LSP board discipline. The board currently has 2 open disciplinary investigations, and both of those investigations are currently actively ongoing. And the next topic is the board website. We recently updated the homepage to the website to make it easier for people to access the information they're looking for. We're also amending the underlying pages on the website to make sure that they are clearer and easier for people to find information. And that's all the updates I have today. Thank you.
All right, I'm up. Is it possible to share slides? I think I'll try.
Let's see. Yeah, you might let Anita.
Just had a few, but if we can't make it work, I can go without.
Okay. I mean, I think if we stop sharing,
yeah,
then
I
we can.
you can share the slides.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. Is this all right? Can folks see?
Okay, I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you for allowing me to share. So again, my name is Katie Kudzma. I am an LSP and currently serve as the LSPA president. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today and we're grateful for the continued collaboration between MassDEP and the LSPA. So we're pleased to end 2025 with 717 members, including 361 members in our LSP membership category. Renewal notices were sent out as LSPA membership runs from January to December, and we've granted, and so these renewal notices were sent out. We've granted the 9 recently licensed LSPs a free year of LSPA membership. So congrats to those who passed this recent set of exams. And looking ahead, we're pleased to announce a full line of membership meetings and courses through March 2026. More information on these programs can be found on lspa.org. Give everyone a moment to look. And then please save the date for the LSPA Environmental Symposium, which will take place on April 9th in Framingham, Massachusetts. As many of you know, this is the LSPA's flagship event that features several courses on timely topics as well as networking. The LSPA has been hard at work in 2025 advocating on behalf of the waste site cleanup profession as well as the public. Of note, in 2025, the LSPA provided comments on several MassDEP guidance documents and policies. In addition, our legislative committee has been working hard to advance home heating oil legislation that would provide automatic coverage for the cleanup of oil releases under homeowners' insurance policies. Recently, our executive director and members of the legislative committee met with the key legislators on strategy to advance a bill forward in this legislative session. The LSPA is proud to announce the recipients of its 2025 to 2026 Environmental Justice Grant Program. Of the 13 applications received, the LSPA will be providing grants to 3 projects: the food projects, Ingalls Farm Greenhouse Construction, Green Roots Cooling Chelsea Program, Youth-Led Micro Resilience Action, Groundwork South Coast's Green Team, and Green Corps at Riverside Park. This year's awardees are advancing health, equity, and environmental protections in EJ communities through community projects that help residents address local environmental challenges, build resilience, and expand access to healthy environments. With that, thank you for your time this morning. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or LSPA's Executive Director, Mary Ellen Morris, with any questions.
Well, thank you, Katie. Much appreciate the update and the great work, and congratulations to the recipients of the Environmental Justice Awards, a key cornerstone of right at the fabric of what we do. So thank you. Great. So now we're going to be introducing the draft COM25 soils policy. I'll just say a few words, and then we will be featuring Luke Rogers, who is our program counsel, straight out of the Office General Counsel. And let me just then let's get started on this one. So today, Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup is pleased to discuss the proposed COM25 soils policy, which, as you know, is out for public comment, and the public comment period ends on December 24, 2025. And as most of you are probably familiar with the COM97 and COM15 policies, those are intended to address soil reuse and disposal requirements consistent with the protection of human health and the environment. Both policies, we believe, have been successful and they continue to be used. But the department has also continued to hear from those who represent that they have excess soils. And those with excess soils, they've expressed a need to create and develop policies that will allow the safe movement of these soils within the Commonwealth. So in the absence of significant legislative movement on this issue, which folks are aware of what we've tried to do prior to developing a proposed soils policy since 2014, COM25 will now be the department's attempt to address excess soils in Massachusetts. Whereas COM97 addresses soils that are placed at landfills, and COM15 addresses soils that are reused at sand pits, gravel pits, and quarries, COM25 or 26 would manage the reuse of soils at Chapter 21E sites. We believe this policy, if finalized, will allow the significant additional reuse of soils in the Commonwealth. And to support that, it does contain a sophisticated and flexible approach and process for developing acceptance criteria on a site-by-site basis, while at the same time implements stringent safeguards to ensure the protection of and involvement by the impacted communities. Again, Luke Rogers, our Chief Bureau Counsel for the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup, is going to be presenting a 30,000 overview of this policy, focusing on the overall structure of it. He will also compare this draft policy to key features of COM 15, as well as COM 25, which we hope we will be able to provide a little bit more understanding in what COM 25 does and doesn't do. And then we will also play a video that's been prepared by Paul Locke, our former Assistant Commissioner of the Bureau of Site Cleanup and former Deputy Commissioner and employee of MassDEP, which will present, as only Paul can do, the technical aspects of the policy's acceptance criteria in a way that hopefully we can all understand. And then finally, we will close with a brief Q&A period in which we look forward, as always, to your input and advice. So with that, I'd like to introduce Luke Rogers of the Office of General Counsel.
Thank you, Millie. I recently learned that commercial jetliners can fly as high as 40,000 feet. So I'd like to amend your initial comment and say I'm going to give a 40,000 foot overview as opposed to a 30,000 foot overview. There obviously, there's lots of complexity in the management of soils historically in Massachusetts as handled by MassDEP. This, in my experience, is essentially would be the third major policy that the Commonwealth has issued to handle these issues. They're all sort of similar, and they're all quite different in different ways. And I'm going to finish by doing a little bit of a comparison between COM 25 as currently proposed and COM 15. I find that's the easiest way to sort of get in my head what's happening here and how it's different from what we've already done. So just to get started, again, this is a very, very high level. Paul's presentation is going to get into some of the really more interesting technical criteria for how to determine what you can import and what you cannot import. But the basic structure, this is in the first page of the proposed policy, for those of you who've already read it. This is a policy that provides notice to persons who are performing response actions at disposal sites, which we're calling a soil receiving site, that we will issue what we're calling COM 25 ACOs to them to help them manage the importation of large quantities of contaminated soil. And there's no other word for what they're importing. It is contaminated soil from one or more other locations. It could be, as currently structured, be from a disposal site. Soil donor site can be a disposal site, or it can be some other location. Again, a very high level, the overall structure of the policy itself. And again, you always have to bear in mind the distinction between the policy that describes how we will issue COM 25 ACOs and the COM 25 ACOs themselves. But the policy is structured fairly similarly to how approvals issued by agencies are typically structured. If you will look at any number of any other programs where by policy or regulation, you're describing how an administrative agency is going to issue what is in essence an approval, you'll see this basic three-part structure here. So the first part is the process that will govern the request for and issuance of the COM 25 ACO. This is now more formal than what we had in COM 15. It does need to be in writing, and it does need to be shared with the public. Section 3 of the policy describes the minimum terms and conditions to be contained in an ACO. So there you basically see a list of terms and conditions that actually, as we drafted them, we began with a couple of COM 15 ACOs and modified those as we thought was appropriate to accommodate what we're doing here. So you should expect what you see in Section 3 of the policy to be, I think, essentially cut and paste and put into a typical COM 25 ACO, plus whatever additional site-specific terms and conditions that the region who is issuing that ACO thinks is appropriate. And finally, public involvement. So these are big projects. They will have impacts on surrounding communities. And so we wanted to make sure that we formalized that public involvement process more than we had done so for COM 15. Here, we're really talking directly to the public. It's not so much a matter of the applicant going and talking to, say, city officials. We really want to make sure that the community surrounding the soil receiving site is aware of what's happening and has an opportunity to comment. We also have some special provisions pertaining to projects that are close to environmental justice communities, and those are contained in Appendix C of the ACO. So next, okay, so this is my last slide, and then we're going to get to Paul. Paul's ghost. Paul no longer works for the agency, but we own his PowerPoint presentations, so we still get to play them. So this is sort of, this is what's in my mind when I think about COM25 ACOs and COM15 ACOs. How are they the same? How are they the different? You'll notice I'll say true COM15 ACOs. A true COM15 ACO for me is one that is at a pit or quarry. COM15 talks about pits or quarries. It was issued by the agency. That policy was issued by the agency shortly after a 2014 statute that Millie alluded to, what we call the reclamation statute, that directed the agency to manage the movement of soils to pits or quarries. There are other ACOs that are out there that are similar to COM15 ACOs, but are not, they're not true COM15 ACOs in that they're not at pits or quarries. So that's a footnote. Okay, so how are they different? How are they the same? One fundamental concept that we think is very important in thinking about these projects is that the soil movement is for the purpose of reuse, not disposal. We are not interested in with these policies in regulating the disposal of soil. We are interested in regulating the appropriate reuse of soil. So the applicant for a COM25 project needs to tell us, what are you using this soil for? What useful purpose is it serving? I don't think that we mean to be overly persnickety in terms of sort of approving the nature of the project, but it does need to be a bona fide, legitimate reuse and not merely a business that is accepting, for example, soil for money. So that's true for both COM15 and COM25. How are they different? So the receiving location, as I've said already a couple of times, for a true COM15 ACO project is a pit or a quarry. For COM25, it's a disposal site. That is super important for a whole number of different reasons and really has all sorts of implications for how we are approaching this policy. It means that we have authority under 21E to regulate the soil receiving site very clearly in a way that we don't at a pit or a quarry. We have separate authority under the 2014 statute. There is a release at the receiving site. We can regulate that release. It is subject to 21E. We are within our core authorities for that reason. So the third column, soil acceptance criteria, generally COM25 will allow much higher levels of contamination. So there's no getting around that. That is absolutely 100% clear, with a few exceptions if the receiving site already has extremely low levels of contamination. If you guys sort of pick through the soil receiving site, you might see that that actually currently is drafted, will act as a cap on what you can bring in. But generally, if you have relatively high contamination levels in the soil receiving site, those act essentially as the cap to what you can bring in, and those can certainly be higher than notification thresholds in the receiving location. So Paul is going to explain that much better but in the video, but there's just no getting around that. You can bring in higher levels of contamination under COM25. And so that also has all sorts of implications for how we're approaching this project generally, including in the fourth column that in the COM25 world, you are being ordered in the COM25 ACO to reach a permanent solution. That doesn't make any sense in the COM15 context, because if it's working right, what you're bringing in is below reportable concentrations at a true COM15 ACO project. So there are no reportable obligations. We do have a notification exception built in anyway as a kind of a belts and suspenders. But in COM25, you can bring in much higher contamination on the one hand, but on the other, you have to reach a permanent solution. And so then you're just in the MCP, and we rely heavily on the MCP to make sure that at the end of the project, you're at a place that makes sense, that is protective, where human health and the environment is protective. In terms of the characterization of soils, I think I'm now on the 5th column. In COM15, typically you were sampling soils as they were brought in to make sure that they were below reportable concentrations at the receiving location. Again, at true COM15 ACO projects. At COM25, because we're dealing with higher levels of contamination, we have 2 levels of sampling. In a sense, 3 once you get to a permanent solution, but I'll get to that in a minute. But you have to characterize the donor site to make sure that the the contamination levels there are appropriate for the location that you're bringing the soils to. And in general, they're more or less determined or capped by what you have at the receiving location already. And then, as belts and suspenders, you have to sample that stuff as you're bringing it in, same as COM15. Second to last column, notification exceptions. So if I were a lawyer representing an applicant for either a COM15 or a COM25 ACO, this is what I would be, among the things that I would be most focused on. In a sense, it's what the applicant is getting from the agency that it doesn't already have in the absence of one of these orders. In the case of COM15, I mentioned already, you have a notification exception. Theoretically, you don't need it because you're supposed to be bringing stuff that's below reportable concentrations anyway, but we built that in. It's a notification exception in case there are relatively trivial amounts that are overlooked. You have the protection of that notification exception as to soils, not as to groundwater. In COM25, you really definitely need that notification exception. Otherwise, every time you're bringing the soil in, you have to notify. So you need that notification exception to do a COM25 ACO. It's an approval. So these COM25 ACOs are containing approvals that are described in 317, 313. It's a notification approval that allows you as the applicant not to have to notify every time you're bringing this stuff in. You need another notification exception. You also need 310 CMR 31.1 that pertains to remediation waste. Hopefully I got that citation right. Now I'm thinking it might be 31.2. I'll check that afterwards. But basically, what you're bringing in quite possibly is remediation waste, as that term is defined in the MCP. It means that it's above notification thresholds at the donor site. That's regulated by the MCP. You need an approval in order to be able to do what you're doing under COM25. A big difference between the way the notification exception jumping back to 317.13 is that the way it's drafted right now is that notification disappears once you have a permanent solution. Why is that? Well, it's once you have a permanent solution, you already have 317.17, which basically is the notification exception that applies if you happen to find something that's above notification thresholds after you reach a permanent solution, but is otherwise consistent with the permanent solution. That applies at a COM25 project just the same as it does to any other 21E site. And so you get it, so you don't need the 317.13 notification exception anymore. Finally, community involvement. I talked about this a little bit. COM15 is a little bit informal. Basically, the regions are looking to the applicant for assurances that they've communicated with local officials. Given the size and scope of these projects and the levels of contamination that we're dealing with here, we believe that it's appropriate that a more formal public involvement process is established. This involves writing a written request for a COM25 ACO, publishing that and allowing the public to comment on it, and the applicant is required then to respond to those comments. So was that 40,000? I don't know. I feel like I dipped down to 10 a couple times there, but I'm done. That's all I have to say. I think, Millie, we just want to switch immediately into Paul's video and then maybe have some conversation. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, Luke. And now Paul.
This video, I'm going to walk through a proposal for how we're going to develop acceptance criteria for sites that will be accepting soil under a new COM24 policy. Of course, this is all still up in the air, and a lot, if not all of this, will change in the final policy. Before we get into the fun slides, I want to cover a few key concepts that are the basis of this proposal. The first concept is that these receiving locations will not be located in GW1 areas, and thus we're not going to be concerned about material leaching out of the soil and threatening or contaminating drinking water. Second, the imported soil cannot contain significant amounts of other material that could leach to groundwater and cause other problems, such as vapor intrusion. So we're going to limit the amount of VOCs, and particularly chlorinated VOCs, that could be in this soil. Next, we're going to rule out the imported soil having significant amounts of some other material, such as solid waste, PCBs, or asbestos. Not only could these materials be problematic from a health or environmental risk point of view, but their presence might also complicate matters through the involvement of other state or federal agencies, such as the Solid Waste Program, NESHAPS, or TSCA. And of course, soil which is a hazardous waste must be handled appropriately and be transported or treated or disposed of at a facility that is licensed or permitted to handle hazardous waste. So hazardous waste will also be prohibited from these COM24 sites. You should keep in mind that the receiving facility is going to have to achieve a permanent solution under the MCP, and that permanent solution must cover not only the soil that was already at that location, but it must address any soil that is imported under COM24. Another important concept is that these receiving locations taking in soil under COM24 are part of a 21E site. We are not going to accept applications for importing soil unless the site has gone through a comprehensive site assessment and an evaluation of remedial alternatives under Phase 3. Therefore, we can count on this site being adequately characterized and the contaminants of concern that are present being well identified. MassDEP should also require that the donor sites, the point of origin for the soil that will be imported, should also be well characterized. Whether a donor site is a 21E site or simply a location undergoing excavation, the performance standards for the donor location soil characterization should be equivalent to that required under the MCP. Whether done under the MCP or not, the soil being excavated should be well characterized, and we should know what the contaminants of concern are and what the concentrations are before the excavation begins. This is the information that will be used to determine whether the soil can go to the COM24 location or not. Note that this differs from the way we deal with COM15 soil, where we rely upon the sampling of individual truckloads. Under this proposal, the sampling of the trucks is merely confirmatory samples to show that this truck coming from that donor location is consistent with what we already know about the soil at the donor location. The basic concept for the COM24 acceptance criteria is that the soil that's being imported cannot be worse than what's already there. It has to be similar to or better than what's already at the receiving location. That's great, but what if the receiving location is really, really, really contaminated? Should DEP allow really contaminated material to be imported to these COM24 receiving sites just because, yeah, it's similar to the gross stuff that's already there? I think the answer is no. We shouldn't allow that kind of gross contamination to be imported. So this proposal includes a cap on how high that contamination can be in the imported soil, regardless of whether it's actually similar to the receiving location or not. In fact, there would be two caps. One, a cap on the mean concentration, and another cap on the maximum concentration. Finally, because we're always concerned about consistency, particularly regional consistency, it's worth pointing out here that the soil acceptance criteria that we develop for individual sites under COM24 will vary from location to location. No two COM24 sites will have the same acceptance criteria because they're going to be based upon what's already at the receiving location. Okay, so now we're going to run through a few examples to illustrate how this would work. Let's start with our receiving site, and it's adequately characterized because it's already gone through phase 2. In fact, we know all about the contaminants of concern and the distribution of concentrations for each and every contaminant of concern. For illustration purposes, I'll be using box and whisker plots to show this distribution, including the minimum, maximum, and mean concentrations. Having identified the concentration distribution for this particular contaminant of concern, we can identify the mean and the maximum values from this distribution and use them as the acceptance criteria when evaluating potential soil to import. To do that, we need similar data from the potential donor location, which has been adequately characterized to either MCP or MCP equivalent performance standards. With that data, we can easily compare the mean to the receiving location mean and the maximum to the receiving location maximum. It looks good. Both values are below the acceptance criteria, so the soil would be acceptable to import. Now let's look at some other potential donor sites. At donor site number 2, the mean concentration is less than the acceptance criteria for the mean at the receiving location. That's great. But if you look over at the right, the maximum concentration is higher than the acceptance criteria for the max. The soil from this site would be rejected. And note that this decision could be made before the trucks even start rolling. In fact, must be made before the trucks start rolling. Our third example has the opposite problem. The maximum concentration meets the acceptance criteria for the maximum value, but the mean is slightly above the acceptance criteria for the mean. And thus, by looking at this data before the trucks start rolling, you already know that the soil from this donor site is not acceptable at the receiving location. So in these examples, we've been using the mean and the maximum values from our receiving site data as the acceptance criteria. But what if these values at the receiving site really represent truly gross contamination? Are we comfortable letting similar donor soil come back onto the property? Let's now explore how a cap on the mean and a cap on the maximum values could be used. So let's use a receiving location that is more contaminated, where, as we see, the mean concentration and the maximum concentrations are way higher than our previous example. As you see along the x-axis, I have added 2 caps. One, a cap on the mean value for the acceptance criteria, and a cap on the maximum value for the acceptance criteria. These values will only come into play if the mean or maximum values at the receiving site are higher than these concentrations. You will see variations on this, of course. One example would be where the mean concentration is somewhat elevated, but the maximum value is okay. Here, the acceptance criteria would be the cap on the mean and the maximum value from the receiving site distribution. Conversely, you could have an example where the mean is okay, but the maximum value is really high. In this case, the acceptance criteria would be the mean of the receiving site distribution plus the cap on the maximum value. If it sounds good so far, let's think about how this would actually look in the COM24 policy. What we want, is a table of acceptance criteria to be in the appendix. But since the acceptance criteria will be site-specific and will vary from one site to another, we can't just have one table. What we can have is a table that leads you through the process and could result in a table of acceptance criteria that would go into the ACO for any given approval. Here's what that table would look like. In the left-hand column, you'd have the list of chemicals. We can fill out the middle columns, columns C and D, because these are standard values that we're going to take out of the MCP. For the cap on the mean, I would suggest 2 times the method 2 direct contact concentrations. For the cap on the max, I would suggest the method 3 sealing limit. These suggestions are placeholders. Feel free to suggest alternatives. As part of the application process, we would require the proponent to come to the table with a list of chemical mean concentrations and maximum concentrations as part of the package they're submitting. This data could be used to fill out columns A and B. With the first 5 columns of the table already filled out, it will be easy then to determine the site-specific acceptance criteria for this receiving location, both for the mean and for the max. The mean acceptance criteria would be the lower of column A and column C. The acceptance criteria for the max would be the lower of column B and column D. Since the proponent will have the necessary site-specific information and the rest of it will be in the COM24 policy, the proponent's application package should include a table that proposes the acceptance criteria for their site based upon this methodology. So the final COM24 policy would have an appendix which describes this process and would contain a table similar to the one you're looking at now that has columns C and D filled out for the contaminants of concern that we want people to sample for, and then space left in columns A and B for them to fill that out. And then the last 2 columns would be determined based upon the comparison to find the lower of the applicable numbers.
Okay. So we have Luke's presentation and also the video. And the question becomes whether we should proceed with the program or stop here for general questions. I think Luke and I were thinking maybe devote 5 minutes to taking up any questions and determining whether we could answer quick questions, given that, as you can see, the actual acceptance calculation and derivation of a soil acceptance criteria would be predicated on site-specific issues. And I do see the question, will the slides from the video be available online? The answer is yes. In addition to that, also, we have already posted the policy alongside with the video. And I believe also a link that gets you into the actual spreadsheet, and folks can play with that spreadsheet and incorporate potential concentrations for the calculation of the acceptance criteria. So I see hands. Luke, do you want to, given that you are presenting, would you like to answer questions as we go along? I see Eileen has a question and Lisa Camp has a question.
Sure. Oops.
Eileen?
Sure. I have just a quick question. It's very clear when, Paul said that the receiving facility can't accept, characteristically hazardous waste. Is there consideration that if the waste is treated at the donor facility, that based on a contained in determination, it could then be disposed of? Or you don't even have to answer the question. I'm really throwing it out as something,
Yeah.
consider the way, what's done at other facilities.
I can try to answer that question. I always feel a little nervous talking about hazardous waste generally and how it relates to hazardous materials. It's super complicated, but I believe our intention is that if it is treated so that it is no longer a characteristic hazardous waste and is not illicit hazardous waste, it's fine. I don't think we intend to prohibit that from being imported into the soil receiving site, so long as it is treated so as no longer to have those characteristics and is not otherwise a hazardous waste.
And do you know if it would be explicit if a contained in determination would be needed?
I think our intent is to be to treat contained in determinations the same as a COM25 receiving site as any other site. I mean, it's you can take it anywhere, right? So long as you have a contained in determination.
Yep.
It's really low levels of concentration, far lower than what we're talking about generally, possibly with this COM25. So I believe that our intent is to allow that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would be both. It's like if it was treated and also if you could get a contained in determination for low levels. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Eileen, just again to underscore, it's our intention to again ensure that you the parties attain a permanent solution. So there is that underpinning that follows the MCP, and there is flexibility insofar as the concentration, so long as you are not exceeding excess lifetime cancer risks or any kind of hazard indices. So,
Yep. Okay, thank you.
thank you. Lisa?
Thanks. I guess a couple questions and just comments, and I haven't read it in detail. I've just kind of skimmed through everything. One thing that struck me, and I think others, is that that's a huge volume of soil that this policy seems to focus upon, greater than 250,000 cubic yards. And I just think there's a lot of opportunity to have beneficial reuse of soil, especially at sites that have, maybe superficial soils that are really not very contaminated, that could be very successfully used for a multitude of purposes at a receiving facility, along the lines of what, the benefits outlined in the policy. So I guess I would put out to DP that, it would be great to actually consider broadening this policy to lower volumes of soil, because I think that could really be a win-win for communities in Massachusetts, and as well as, development for all kinds of good purposes like, housing and floodplain sort of restoration, et cetera. One question I had about the acceptance criteria, it says mean and max at the receiving site or location. Do you mean the exposure point concentration that was used in the phase 2, or do you mean the 95% UCL in the mean, or can people just use a straight up arithmetic mean at the site?
I cannot answer that question. Millie that's, I don't know if Ken is still around.
He's retired now.
Yeah.
So, the information has to come from a finalized a site that already has a phase 3.
Right.
So we are looking at the same way and approach for calculating exposure point concentrations that get into the exposure point concentration parameter when calculating risk. So we want to continue to have the same approach so it's consistent throughout, and your endpoint concentration is not any different than what we typically use to make that determination when you want to attain a permanent solution. So I would say it's the average, typically, what you're calculating when you arrive at an exposure point concentration.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that's not clear, that's not something, I would definitely put that, if you're, please send that as a written comment or question, so that we don't lose track of that and we can clarify that in the final policy. In terms of the volume, I don't know, did you want to address the volume, Millie, or?
Oh, the volume issue. I think from the onset of this process, back in dialogue and discussions with the constituency that knocked on DEP's door, it was represented that it was for those big, super big projects. As Luke described, we have true CON-15 administrative consent orders. Those are the ones that contemplate importation of soils at pits and sand and quarries and things like that. However, we also have seen others that are a tweener option, not quite those receiving locations, but other locations. So I think DEP has entertained some level of flexibility for the smaller volume projects through the auspices of other policies. This policy is, from the get-go, has been announced as one that envisions very large projects. But I think, again, there's value in your comment. And I think at the onset of Paul's video, he stated, this is a concept. If there's something that yields better fruit in terms of ensuring that there is support for, never mind management of soils, but also beneficial reuse, and endpoints that lead to, say, for example, housing in an economic crunch. That would be something that, again, comments being accepted here.
Yeah.
But this is really, again, the concept that it contemplated extremely very large projects that have a need for significant soil, and the representation of concern that these projects do exist, but there's no home for these soils.
Yeah. You know, if I may, Millie, just a couple of supplemental observations of that, you know, things that I think that generally have been discussed. We're sort of moving away from the privatized program when we get into this kind of sort of site-specific approval. And resources get to be a really big deal. We hear a lot from our regional staff that these things are labor intensive. And so if you reduce, you know, the volume threshold large, you know, enough, you're basically creating an entirely new permitting scheme or approval scheme that would require an entirely new program to administer. And we need to be really careful about that. We're not hiring additional staffing to manage this. You know, and I think another observation that some might make, or that you might hear, is that you know, we want this soil to be beneficially reused, but we also are thinking about capacity. And so if you can create enough capacity with a small number of large projects, that's a good thing. You know, how much are we increasing capacity if we're suddenly opening this up to a large number of small projects? And finally, it's trade-offs, right? There's risk in dealing with 21 of these sites all the time. So if you're suddenly allowing a large number of small sites all over the Commonwealth, that becomes harder to maintain and oversee and control. So I think that some might argue that the additional risk that you're creating in instituting, you know, such a wide-ranging program, you know, is less clearly is outweighed by the benefits that are associated with, you know, creating excess soil capacity.
Yeah, there's also a last comment that I wanted to also express here. We strategically worked with the Office of General Counsel and John Fitzgerald, Eric Foley from the Bureau of Administrative Services to develop two policies that would be companion policies to support COM 25. Those include the engineered barrier and also the financial assurance mechanism, which they went through public comment process. The comments are back, and we are now finalizing. So insofar there is any call out for consideration of engineered barriers, there's an updated version to that guidance, also coupled with BWSC specific financial assurance mechanism guidance also. So just a side note here. Any other comments on the chat?
Hey, this is Roxy. She likes to say hi to everybody. Say hi, Roxy. Yeah. Beautiful dog.
Okay, so we're gonna have the dog
Hi.
comments,
Yeah.
muted.
First nippy morning. I know it's starting.
I don't know if Mr. O'Brien, I don't know if that's coming from you, but if you'd be so kind as to mute yourself, that'd be great. Okay. Any additional comments regarding the soils COM
Really, there's
25
a couple
policy?
comments in the chat that I think you can kind of address real quick. I don't know if you saw them.
Yeah, do you mind? I can't
Yep.
see them.
I can read them to you. So first one, are the receiving sites subject to the normal MCP PIP requirements as well? I mean, they are.
That's a good, yeah, that's a
Go
good
ahead.
question. I mean, I think the answer is yes. We haven't eliminated those requirements, you know, and we obviously have the public involvement of requirements contained in the policy. If people have comments about that, I think, you know, do they work well together? Are they, you know, I think that's fair game.
Yep. All right. Next comment: can soil from URAMs that are adequately characterized be used as donor sites?
Well, I mean, you just have to follow what the Count 25 says, right? So you have to adequately characterize it. So if otherwise the MCP permits the use of that soil and you're following the process that's laid out in Count 25, including, donor site pre-characterization, as we're calling it, it should be fine, unless there's something about URAMs that I don't know about that would, but it just,
Yeah,
That was my thought too, Luke. So but I'm deferring to you.
Yeah, the characterization has to be akin to, it's going to be apples and apples, so that there is assurance that what's going in has been vetted and it's consistent and not in opposition. And I think, again, if there is a donor site that it's not a 21E site, and upon characterization, there's a determination that all of a sudden now there's a notifying condition. Obviously, that particular donor site now becomes part of the 21E universe through the auspices of notification.
Right, that's right. Yeah, and we didn't mention that, so that's an important point. So just to underline that, if one of your soil donor sites is not currently a disposal site and in performing the donor site pre-characterization, you get a notifiable condition, you have to notify, and now you have a disposal site.
Right.
All right, last comment in the chat. The volume limit applies to the receiving site. Is that correct? So lots of small sites can still send soil there for reuse and benefit from this, just like
Yes.
Comp 15.
Correct.
Okay. Yep, and that's all in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Brian, thank you so much for reading those comments and for folks that are participating in this process. It's been a long journey, COM24, and who knows COM26, but I think we wanted to for sure get it right. And hopefully December 24th gives folks enough time to review, weigh in, and comment. All of the resources available for review are noted on our page, and we will happily post this video alongside the soil policy package that includes, again, the video, the spreadsheet, and the policy that's in draft form. So thank you, everybody, for your continued interest, and for sure your providing us with comments that really are rooted in the reality that you manage on a day-to-day basis as licensed site professionals and consultants and project proponents. So thank you. Okay, so we will continue on along those lines. I especially wanted to introduce a presentation that is also soil specific, but I thought it would be interesting. Oftentimes, consultants may feel that there are some hard and fast rules for the management of soil, and I'm here to say that the site cleanup program, also working in tandem with other programs that might come to the fold, where there is the Wetlands Protection Act or other types of projects, programs converge when it comes to very large projects. And this one in particular, I'm pleased to bring to you, and I'm very grateful to Director Michael Stiller from AECOM, who's an LSP and a PG, and he'll be talking about a remarkable project involving the management of large quantity of soils and also reuse with a beneficial reuse purpose. So with that, I will have Michael talk a little bit about the MassDEP, Transportation Authority, MBTA, folks who completed the construction of the South Coast Rail, the SCR program, which served to restore the commuter rail service to the South Coast of Massachusetts, including the environmental justice communities of Taunton, Fall River, and New Bedford. This particular project, as Michael's going to talk about, involved 35 miles of new track and construction of 2 layover facilities and 6 stations. Hence, this work involved the excavation of 390,000 cubic yards of soils and track bed materials. And it was quite remarkable and very impressive that upon the completion of this program in May 2025, there was so much beneficial reuse of all these soils, and they represented 93% of all these soils were able to be reused, the total materials that were excavated. So in keeping with MassDEP and the Bureau for Site Cleanup, listening to often the reality and the challenges associated with soil management. Again, I'm pleased to introduce to you all Michael Stiller from AECOM. So please kindly come to the table, and I know that he's presenting on behalf of MBTA and on behalf of Deborah Darby, and also Kim Dobas from the MBTA, and Katie Kutzma, who also participated in this project. So take it away, Michael, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much, Millie. Hi, everybody. If we go to the next slide, please. So yeah, as Millie had mentioned, 36 miles of track, 6 new stations, 2 new layover facilities, over 70 culverts, 14 bridges, work in 8 cities and towns. This restored Old Colony Railroad passenger service, which was in place from 1880s through the 1950s. Since the 1950s, freight rail service continued throughout these track corridors and was active throughout the construction period. So the first set of the part of the presentation, the first half of the slides, is going to talk more about brownfields reuse, revitalization, et cetera, some environmental wetlands aspects, but then the second half is more geared toward that soil reuse strategy and some of the details. And again, I'm here presenting on behalf of a much larger team that was really successful because of all the collaboration across multidisciplines, designers, engineers, contractors, as well as, very importantly, MassDEP Southeast region. So next slide, please. So yeah, project included revitalization of brownfields, contaminated sites, reuse of contaminated soils to minimize offsite disposal and landfills. The following presentation was also recently presented at AEHS UMass in October. So some of you have already seen a lot of this, but we did shift some of the presentation content to focus specifically for this group with a little more detail on the soil reuse. Next slide, please. So during the planning stages, which date back many, many years, this project has been in planning, development, design, permitting for many, many years. Numerous alternatives were considered for siting the corridor, siting the footprint, but by keeping the project footprint within the existing rail corridors, environmental impacts were substantially reduced, and in fact, in some cases, restored conditions back to the pre-1880s original construction. Intentionally sited both of the layover facilities in New Bedford and Fall River, as well as 4 of the 6 stations on existing contaminated sites, as well as underutilized vacant commercial and industrial properties. So really trying to be intentional of siting the project to have the maximum environmental benefit. The revitalization, next slide, please. And next slide. There we go. Thank you. The revitalization of blighted properties included abatement of hazardous materials, removal of underground storage tanks, removal of debris containing PCBs and asbestos. Permanent solution statements were achieved for the several RTNs that were part of the program areas. Again, Middleborough, couple in Fall River, couple in New Bedford as well. All right, next slide, please. So resiliency was another key aspect environmentally for the program. The construction included long-term improvements to the freight use, which again was active during construction and continues to this day. It's now a shared corridor for freight use as well as passenger service, including flood and storm resiliency improvements. Program also included improvements which benefited wetlands, improved water quality. The photo at the bottom here is the Acushnet River. This was an innovative bridge construction technique to replace that Acushnet River bridge. The new bridge was built off-site, moved by rail, and then slid into place over a weekend track outage. Again, we were not able to disrupt freight service for more than a few days at a time. This construction technique reduced the duration not just of the freight disruption, but also the duration of in-water work, and also had a smaller footprint of disturbance to the wetlands and the resource areas versus the more traditional construction techniques. Next slide. Natural resources. So the project created new wetland areas to restore habitat disturbed for construction. Endangered turtle species were protected during construction. They're prevalent throughout both of the corridors, both the Fall River Secondary as well as the New Bedford Mainline track corridors. Included installation of over 130 new crossings for the turtles and other wildlife to cross under the tracks, which restored those connections which were lost over 100 years ago when the original track construction occurred. Project included beneficial reuse of granite from old bridges and culverts, which were placed off-site as artificial reefs in Nantucket Sound to enhance fisheries habitats. Next slide. All right, so now we'll jump into really the bulk of this, the meat of this for this focus for today, the soil reuse aspects. VHB, Catherine Kudzma, was a part of this many years ago and throughout construction as well. She started with, pre-construction sampling confirmed contamination consistent with published values for historic railroad beds. Not a big surprise. Varying concentrations of arsenic, PAHs, highest concentration in soils located in the immediate proximity to the tracks. You'll see the cross section at the bottom there for the track corridor and the right-of-way. We did estimate during the design a total of 390,000 cubic yards of materials were going to be excavated, including track ballast, stone, subballast, soils, topsoil, side slope areas as well. The program also included a diversity of terrain, challenges of narrow track corridors in remote areas, as well as some dense urban residential areas, station sites, layover facilities, etc. So when we're talking about total excavation, it's from all of the track bed areas as well as the station sites, layover facilities, and same for the reuse. So next slide, please. So initial planning was an important aspect of the program and success of the program. Planning for reuse was integrated in design development for cut-fill balance, as well as preparing construction contract specifications, performance milestones, payment items, and a fill management plan, again, program-wide. There were a number of different construction contracts, but we really tried to look at this as an overall master program. There was a special project designation permit that was issued by MassDEP, and right at the outset, during the end of design but prior to construction, there were a number of planning meetings with MassDEP, which were resulted in really excellent collaboration, and then the concurrence and support of the reuse approach from MassDEP, which was really key to the program's success. The design development included what we conservatively estimated was a 75% reuse goal, which was really based on arsenic. The DEP approval indicated that, greater than 20 ppm of arsenic was only to be reused within the railroad corridor, to try to mimic where it existed or came from before we started construction. Importantly, geotechnical properties were also critical to consider for what could be reused and where, especially the new track bed requirements for the new track criteria, both ballast stone, subballast, soils, etc., topsoil for restoration. Again, the geotechnical parameters were just as important as the contaminant concentrations when we're looking at reuse options and alternatives. So next slide, please. Once we got to contract bidding, construction stage, important aspects of those requirements included a number of items. We had excavated materials management plans from each of the contractors, which identified volumes as well as time frames for excavation, as well as where could be reused and when. Material shipping records were used to track all transfers throughout the program, as well as cross-contract transfers. We had a review process specifically for both the EMMPs and the MSR with the design engineer, as well as our construction management team. The contractor focus on segregation of materials, transfer, stockpiling, and staging was important from time frame considerations. and then our oversight to assure they were managing all of this per the EMMPs. We had field folks out there working with and alongside the contractors to assure compliance. There was a master spreadsheet which tracked all soils within the program, from which we were able to periodically review reuse goals and the KPIs. Contractor collaboration was really critical to program success. Next slide, please. And yeah, that's so we had various incentives built into the contracts as during the bidding, which helped get the contractors' collaboration right from the start, and then them recognizing some of the cost incentives that were built into that really resulted in their buy-in, which was key, as well as their LSPs, which was significant to sample and further characterize all these materials prior to actual movement. So what were the results? The program achieved, as Millie mentioned, over 93% actual reuse metric over the 5 years of construction. It included over 360,000 cubic yards of soils that were ultimately kept out of landfills. The other benefit of doing this is we also needed less from sand pits, gravel pits, natural resource areas that we did not need to disturb to generate some of the materials that were needed for construction. We did have over 25,000 that went off-site for disposal, but most of that was comprised of PCB soils from the New Bedford Tosca site, which was a requirement from EPA. They did not want to see that material reused. So next slide, please. All right, lessons learned, key aspects of this program that we try to take to other programs, other projects. Planning is key. Soil transfer sequencing and timing is important, not just what can go where, but the when is important, especially for these longer duration contracts with limited staging areas. Coordination, collaboration with MassDEP was critical. The contract structure and incentives, building that in so you can get really good contractor collaboration, which is inherent to the contract, and getting them to recognize the incentives that are built into that. Again, staging processing space was important. Material restrictions, both geotechnical and high arsenic, recognizing those before you start generating or what you're going to do with the materials. And yeah, finally, just the geotechnical criteria. We had ordinary burrow, gravel burrow, subballast, ballast, unsuitable materials, and topsoil. So, it wasn't just dirt. There's a number of different aspects that were important to recognize. Next slide, please. All right. So again, thank you to Catherine Kudzma, LSP from VHB as the designer of record, Deborah Darby from MBTA, Holly Palmgren, formerly with MBTA, a number of others from design teams, owners representatives, contractors. Project would not have been successful without the strong support from MassDEP Southeast Region, and again, all of the various construction contractors and the multiple LSPs that were working on their behalf to further characterize and prepare the material shipping record documents and plans. So at this point, I'll open it up to questions.
Well, certainly. And Michael, I just want to say thank you so much for bringing all this content. And also, I'd like to recognize, if all folks want to look into the chat, Chris Barnett very pointedly added additional commentary around this project, which is the why for this project. And for so many decades, these areas have been underutilized, underserviced insofar as transportation to the Boston area. So this project has opened up a new way for the population to transit from these terminal points into Boston, supporting potential employment opportunities, lessening the number of cars that navigate through Route 24, 140, getting into the main artery in Boston. So so many benefits. So I appreciate also that very important motivation for this project to really provide this service and take all these vehicles out of the already congested roads, and so many benefits, including improved air quality. So it all worked to folks' satisfaction. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, seeing no questions, we're going to move on to, thank you, Michael. We're going to move on to Greg Braun. Greg, I believe you're muted. If you don't mind unmuting yourself. Thank you.
My apologies. Let me start that over. Thank you, Millie, and thank you, Michael, for your presentation. Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Braun in the Risk Analysis Group, and this morning I'm going to touch on a couple things. One sort of a reminder for folks, and one sort of an update of the risks, the ADF reminder, and the risk characterization guidance sort of update, so people know where we are with that. Next slide, please. So the age-dependent adjustment factors, this is an approach that was put forth in 2005 by US EPA to capture some of the potential risk to developing children from mutagenic carcinogens. Sometimes you'll hear this approach referred to as a mutagenic mode of action, or MMOA. And the guidance is, there's quite a bit of material in there. If folks are interested in details, this is mostly meant as just an overview. Next slide, please. So in 2005, this is sort of some quick overview of what that policy sort of touched on in 2005. They basically concluding that early life exposures can result in development of cancer in children, that the young age groups are potentially at higher risk from these mutagenic compounds, and that they recommended applying this age-dependent adjustment factor approach for a limited number of contaminants for children. Next slide, please. So we wrestled with this for quite a while, but the first time we really sort of communicated this to a broader audience or the external community was in 2019, when we put forth the proposed MCP revisions. There's several pages in there that touch on the ADF approach, so folks were aware that's something we were interested in having people do to capture this potential risk to children. Next slide, please. Oh, I should say before we move on, that document is still on the web if you're interested to find it. I think if you just Google 2019 MCP proposed revisions, you can find it. Next slide, please. And around the same time, there was a training that went on with these, the MCP proposed amendments that touched on the ADF approach, just so folks are aware. Next slide, please. So there's basically two approaches that EPA recommended. One was this default approach, which I'll touch on in a little bit, but for chemicals that there's more specific and a more robust toxicological information, there's some chemical specific approaches that are proposed for, in particular, TCE and vinyl chloride. Next slide, please. So going a little bit deeper into this, the two methods, the chemical specific method, as I mentioned, it's mostly vinyl chloride and TCE. For the default method, they're recommending that these age-dependent adjustment factors be used for mutagenic compounds, and that list, which is mostly composed of mutagenic PAHs. Next slide, please. So the generic approach applies an adjustment factor of 10 for the cancer slope factor and the inhalation unit risk for children between birth and 2 years of age, to account for this potential mutagenetic carcinogenicity. And then for older kids from between the ages of 2 and 16, they recommend an adjustment factor for those mutagens of 3, and beyond 16, it's an ADF of 1 or no adjustment. Next slide, please. So you can see these calculations in both the short forms and the Method 1 standards, and I included this slide just as a sort of an example, and highlight the note about these calculations are available in other tabs. You can dig around in the other tabs in the short forms. This is a residential soil short form, and it's hard to see, I know, but just using Chrysene as an example here. So you can see some of these calculations, and we did wrestle with this for quite a while to try to fold these mutagenetic calculations into the existing short forms, and Method 1 standards took quite a bit of time and effort, which I won't go into the details of that now, but it wasn't exactly easy. So if you're interested in seeing those calculations in more detail, you can, or you can go into the 2005 EPA policy document. Next slide, please. While we touched on short forms, I just wanted to add a little reminder here. Most of you I know are aware, but the short form user guide specifically mentions that if you're going to modify the short forms, those modifications should be documented, highlighted, and discussed in the narrative to provide some justification for why these modifications were made. We're not averse to it. We just want to make sure that people are bringing it to our attention that it's not a standard short form if you're modifying it. And next slide. Okay, changing gears a little bit here. Just a quick update for where we are at the moment with the risk guidance. I think most of you are aware that we've gotten through chapters 1 through 10, and I thank you all for your feedback and comments. And we're incorporating those to the extent that we can. The current review process has the general eco risk and the wetland eco risk chapters under review, which are due early December. And I should say here, we're open to taking in feedback that happens after the 5th, or if you are working on a site and you're like, wait, they didn't talk about this in this guidance document or this chapter, and you want to bring it to our attention, please feel free to reach out to us. Next slide. The next big chunk is chapter 11 of the Method 3 risk characterization. This is currently sitting around 75 pages, so folks are aware. There's also several or multiple appendices associated with this. The two more ecological risk chapters planned. One is the aquatic eco risk, which is being drafted by Tom Angus in ORS, and the terrestrial eco risk, which I'm working on. And they also have a number of appendices. Some of those, or a good portion of those, are existing technical updates. And we're not planning on recirculating them, just adding them as an appendix that may or may not get updated in the future. Next slide, please. So a little bit more on the chapter 11 or method 3. This has been under review for quite some time with the toxicology division in ORS. As I mentioned, there are a variety of appendices planned for this chapter. The dioxin and furan TEF approach, sediment soil adherence factors, and ADAFs they'll have a specific appendix for sort of the methodology for that as well, and several others. This has gone through one round of feedback from internal waste site cleanup folks, and we're planning to release it for general comments, public comments in early 2026. Next slide, or is that the last slide? No, okay. This is just a sort of a note. Someone, an LSP, had contacted me and asked me the question, well, is this to be the new guidance meant to complement the 95 guidance or replace? And it's mostly meant to replace the 95 guidance. You'll see for veterans of risk characterization, we'll recognize some of the language is very similar, if not the same, and oftentimes it's in the same chapters. So this document, these chapters are meant to replace the 95 guidance, not necessarily to be used in conjunction. And then based on feedback that I've received from LSPs, risk assessors, and I believe at an earlier meeting in the SAC, we do plan to have some meetings with risk assessors sometime late in the process before it's final to garner any remaining concerns, things that they might see as a real problem as far as implementation goes, because it is somewhat hard. It is abstract writing a chapter about this when you're not going through a lot of sites to catch everything. So that's the plan for now, and I would say open up to a couple questions if folks have them. And I see Lisa's hand is up. So
shocker. Hi, Greg.
Good morning.
So I'm pleased to see this last sentence here about having a couple meetings with risk assessors to have some additional, or actually have some dialogue, which I think is a much more efficient and effective way sometimes to kind of get to the issues and resolve them. Will revised versions of some of the chapters that have been commented upon thus far be put out again prior to these meetings? Because that would be obviously really, really helpful, because we'd like to know sort of what DEP is considering from the feedback that we've provided thus far on the previous chapters.
That's a fair question. And my sort of quick response to that is yes, I would like to do that, and I see the value in doing that. So that would be the goal. I can't say 100% that's a hard yes, but I will make all efforts and attempts to make that happen, because I think that otherwise, we're stuck kind of in this loop of, well, you said you were going to do this, and this is where you are now, and we recommend, I see the value in doing that. So that would be my goal.
Yeah, we would support that, Lisa.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for giving us so much content. Oh, I see Jane. Jane has a question.
Hey, Millie. I'm curious, Greg, is there something specific that prompted the ADAF review?
Well, it's just a reminder for folks, because we occasionally do see approaches that don't, or risk characterizations that are not incorporating the ADF approach.
Okay. And if we is the RSL table a reasonable, I mean, obviously TC and vinyl chloride are separate, but is having like that M designation in the RSL table a sufficient, would you consider that sufficient for identifying what chemicals should be considered mutagenic?
Well, I mean, right now, probably I'd have to go back and look to say
with that list, yeah.
But probably it is. But also, if you go into the Method 1 standards or the short form,
yes, that's right. It is in
calculations. I think it's 11 COC.
There is a column, you're right. Yeah, that
Yeah,
lists the
6 or
mutagens.
7 PAHs, TCE, vinyl chloride, and dichloromethane, I believe, are the ones. So it's a small set, and that, you know, who knows? Anybody's guess, but that could change or shrink or swell. I don't know. But for now, it's just 11 contaminants that we're thinking that, or we in EPA believe the mutagenic mode of action should be incorporated into risk characterization.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, last but not least, John Ziegler with some PFAS updates.
Yeah, thanks, Millie. Good morning, everyone. I just want to go through just updating some site numbers with you, and then things that we're continuing to focus on and evaluate. So, Amita, may I have the next slide, please? So the chart on the left is just showing us the total number of PFAS notifications we've received in waste site cleanup over the years. I think you can see from the chart, the last 3 years have held pretty steady. We have a total of 208 notifications, and these data are as of end of September of this year. 208 notifications, fairly steady over the last 3 years. You do see that there was a spike in notifications 2021, 2022. That was related to our really initial efforts at identifying PFAS in either private wells or associated with public water supplies. The pie chart on the right is just broken down by category. Certainly 2-hour and 72-hour notifications make up the bulk of the notifications we've received, related to either detections of PFAS in private wells or in proximity to private wells. Additionally, with the 2-hour, that also includes where AFFF may have been applied, or releases from fire suppression systems that contained AFFF. And then the last observation from these numbers, most of the notifications are related to impacts to groundwater. Only about 10% of them are for exceedances of the soil standards only. And if I could have the next slide, please. In just looking at the reports that we've received, it was kind of interesting to go through and just see what are people identifying as potential PFAS sources. I'll just add a caveat that, DP has not gone through these reports and necessarily confirmed or said, yes, we agree with that identified source, but this is what's being reported out to us. Maybe not surprisingly, you can see, we have almost a third of our sites that a source has not been identified for, followed closely by AFFF being a significant source of PFAS releases. And then it falls off a bit, but certainly septic systems, releases from wastewater systems, and then landfills being also significant sources. I don't know if that's really surprising, but certainly focus areas for us. And if I could have the next slide, please. And then as far as where sites are in the MCP process, so of those 200 sites, we've only got about 20 of them that have reached either a permanent or temporary solution, with the vast majority of sites still undergoing assessment, be it either phase 1 or phase 2 comprehensive site assessment. And of the sites where a remedy has either been implemented or planned, the things that we most commonly are seeing are a remedy that includes monitoring only of a stable plume, installation of a permeable reactive barrier. And then I just want to mention that at Joint Base Cape Cod, we do have an ongoing pilot test for soil piles that uses the smoldering technology. And if I can have the next slide. Of course, we've reported on this quite a bit in the past on our efforts to address imminent hazards. I think you're all aware that DEP does have a statutory requirement where we have an imminent hazard in a private well to address that situation. Our process has been to install point of entry treatment systems that utilize granular activated carbon. The photo on the right of the slide shows a pretty typical setup where we have a lead lag, GAC vessels, couple of sediment filters, some sampling ports, and UV disinfection. To date, we've installed a total of 98 POET systems. Our standard procedure is to do the monitoring and maintenance of these POET systems for 2 years prior to transferring them over to site owners. And to date, we've transferred 37 of those systems. So we're continuing maintenance and monitoring, therefore, on 61 systems. An emerging issue that has arisen is the absorption or potential absorption of radon on the GAC filters. We have DEP staff have reported on this potential issue at a couple of meetings. One was the LSPA PFAS symposium back in April, and then again we talked about it recently at the AEHS conference last month. And the issue with radon, GAC has been great in treating PFAS. It's also a great adsorbent for radon. So where you have elevated radon in the influent, as that radon naturally decays, it has potential to emit gamma radiation from the GAC vessels. And also as it continues its decay to lead-210, it may result in a disposal issue for the spent GAC. So we are continuing to evaluate this issue and hope to have more guidance on this in the future. Currently, we're just addressing these systems on a case-by-case basis. We have installed aeration pretreatment, which is essentially industry standard for dealing with elevated radon in private wells. We've installed a couple of systems in our Northeast region where we have POETs. And the next slide, just future topics. I think I've mentioned each of these a little bit. We just talked about the radon issue. Another way, in addition to aeration, to consider to address this is the use of alternate absorbents for PFAS that don't have an affinity for radon. So we're looking into those technologies. Regarding point of use systems, we again have chosen to address imminent hazards with point of entry treatment systems. We are looking at point of use type systems to see if or when would these be appropriate when conducting MCP response action. So that work is continuing. From the source slide, you saw that septic systems, wastewater residuals, those are being identified as significant sources of PFAS, not surprisingly. So, we know we have some work to do on this issue, both from a technical and regulatory perspective, and that continues to be a focus area for us. We are also continuing to look at innovative remediation technologies. I mentioned the smoldering pilot tests being done at Joint Base Cape Cod. So hopefully, maybe at the next meeting or some subsequent meeting, we'll be able to report out on the results of that smoldering pilot test. And then another issue that that we come up against, and I'm sure all of you do as well, as we are monitoring these point of entry treatment systems, is the expense of the analysis for PFAS. And so we continue to look at whether or not there are field screening methods that might be appropriate as we evaluate the effectiveness of these systems. So that's what I have. If there's time, I'm happy to take some questions. I think there's something in the chat.
I think Mr. Billow from Sovereign had a question. I think it goes to, it goes to the what media is used in permeable reactive barriers for treating PFAS.
Yeah, it's carbon-based material. I'm not specific. I think it's a carbon-based material that I've seen used.
Yeah, it's colloidal carbon.
Colloidal carbon. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay, so Amita, was that the last of the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody. I believe our next meeting is scheduled for March. Is that the date, Amita? Do you know?
February.
Yeah. March.
It's February, Millie. It's the third Thursday in February.
Okay, so we'll be sending plenty of notice on that. And again, on behalf of the Bureau for Site Cleanup, we're so grateful to each and every one of you for providing us with insight, direction, how to spend our time, energy, effort, and love for the environment into doing great things. For sure, this has been a year of a lot of change, a year that's, we continue to catch up on the science. And, but most importantly, I do want you to know that every single person in MassDEP comes to the table with open mind, ideas, and we really appreciate when you have ideas also that make for a better program. I'm especially thankful to the regions also for doing so much work and using our guidance policy and our contract services to deliver on services that are protective of everybody. So thank you, especially to also the advisory committee. We are so grateful for your time. And I look forward to hearing from you, especially on these very important policies that we hope to complete as soon as possible. So Ken, on behalf of all of us and us, the DEP, you will be missed. We really appreciate all you've done, and we wish you a very, very happy retirement. And as they say, people come back and it's like they look like 20 years younger. So I'm so excited and thrilled for you. Enjoy what life has to bring for you in the next many decades.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I've been getting comments and emails. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Well, take care of y'all. We'll see you in February. Thank you, and season's greetings.